Welcome back to the DIY Creative Podcast. I am your host, Aben Crawford, also known as Senator Jaiz, and today we have a real treat. We have the musical act Embers here with us. This is Larry Miller. Larry, how you doing, man?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here, and it's cool to connect with you, at least virtually, face to face, as opposed to just on Instagram feeds.
People faces make a difference these days. Hey, a people face.
I know.
They do exist.
With actual interactions in a real-time situation.
Yeah. You don't have to go to the grocery store to see them.
That's right. And we see each other without masks, too, right?
Yeah,
now.
exactly.
That's kind of nice.
Yeah. So, Larry, we're here talking about the independent music scene, what it's like to be an independent, maybe get some tips from you on how you navigate the world. And we also want to talk about your music.
Right on.
So is there anything right up front that you would like to let people know about yourself?
Wow. Yeah, well, thanks a lot. And I guess that, disclaimer, I professed no expertise in how to navigate this world other than what I'm figuring out as we move along here. And I am enjoying what I'm doing, but I by no means consider myself, at the top of the game or anywhere close to it. But, we're all working through this in this constantly evolving model of independent music, which is wildly different than when I came up, for sure. And so I guess about me, I'll keep it brief for now, but yeah, Embers is the umbrella that I'm using to describe the current set of music I'm releasing, at least a certain subset of it. I named it that just because over my trajectory of many years playing and performing and writing music, there's been ebbs and flows and lulls during times when other things took priority. And I thought of the analogy of fanning the embers. You can either let embers in a fire die out, or you can do something with them, right? And so to me, it was very symbolic of making a very conscious decision to kind of yet again revitalize and pump up and do something much more intentional with my musical endeavors, alongside all the other stuff in our busy lives. So that's kind of the nutshell of how it came to be, but we can talk more about it as we move along.
That's awesome. I often say the same thing. I profess to have absolutely no expertise in what I'm doing. It's kind of flailing from one thing to another, hoping that some of it sticks. But that's the beauty of the independent music scene. There are some people that have had a little bit of success and they try to capitalize on that and try to become a guru. But the fact is, in the independent music scene, the beauty of it is we're making it up as we go along and we're not beholden to any masters.
Correct.
A failure doesn't mean a failure in our world. It just means we're off to the next thing. Whereas in the mainstream music industry, a failure means you get dropped. You don't know what to do. Well, I find it very funny that I see these bands that I grew up with in the 80s. These are guys that have spent time in professional studios. They know how the game is done, but then they want to make this comeback and they're like, we're trying to get signed. I'm like, if anybody in the world, you have the name recognition that we don't have, you could go into your own studio that you could put together for hardly any money, make an album, and you have a much better chance of making it than the rest of us. But you stick to your old ways and we'll take over with the new.
Yeah, it's funny. The model just changed around a lot of people while they weren't looking or while they had their heads tucked down doing what they knew. And that's understandable. That happens in a lot of, things when disruption happens. And again, I think it's a double-edged sword, which may be something we can get into depending on where we meander on this, in this episode or in our conversation. But I think it's really great, the barrier to entry and the ability to do your own thing. And as you said, meander and experiment and test the waters and figure out, what you want to do is extremely liberating, but can also, depending on your personality, and I'm speaking just for myself, if there aren't any goals or any markers, then you can completely meander aimlessly and not get anything done, right?
That's
true. That's sort of having all day to fiddle in Pro Tools or Ableton or whatever, or to, I'll try this on Instagram and that on SoundCloud and this on YouTube. I found that that's a good place to start. And then depending on what one's goals are, you have to hone in and have a strategy, even in the independent world, if you have goals. If you just want to have fun and get things done, there's nothing wrong with that, and that could be your goal. But it's a double-edged sword. I think freedom can breed some, I don't know what the word is, scattered results if you're not too careful.
Well, in our world, that's a great way to look at it because it's not just on getting things done in our world or managing your career. Having too many options these days, we have too many options in the fact that on my iPad right here, I have more synthesizers on that than were even available in the world when
Right?
Sergeant Pepper's was created.
For sure.
So it's like you gotta learn somewhere along, and as an independent you got to find your laser focus somewhere, but then realize you still have some wiggle room here.
Exactly. And I think it's a Venn diagram that is in different overlapping ways for each person. And again, the beauty of it is that there's no formula that has to apply to everyone, but I think it's healthy to at least try to figure out where structure feels comfortable for you, so that you can feel accomplishment, whatever that means for you, so.
For anybody listening, since this is an audio podcast, I have not stopped nodding in agreement to anything that he has said. So you're not seeing the video here, but my head's bobbing like I'm some kind of a hockey bobblehead here. So yeah. Well, Larry, man, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that the very start was you were born. So
Yes.
From being born to being here, what got you into music, and what's been your path, sort of?
For sure. I was very young when I was born. It's a true story. So I think let's see, I'll try not to, I'll try to hit the high points, but I grew up in New York City, born and raised in Queens, New York. I'm in Iowa City now, which is a long story, but the moral of which is love will take you to strange and unexpected places. So, I met the love of my life, and we wound up, she was in Iowa and I wound up here. But long story short, coming up in what I'd say would be the 70s, and then as a musician in the, much more fundamentally in the 80s and 90s is when I was really cutting my teeth as a player. I definitely grew up with parents of the 60s and 50s. And so my earliest exposure, as just a toddler and before, were things like Zappa, the Moody Blues, the Beatles, the Stones, all of it that you might imagine, and anything and everything in between, classical music, etc. Very musical family, not musicians, but musical. And so all of that set me up to be really keenly interested in that. And then, of course, growing up and going to school with denim jackets and loose leaf, binders with writing your Kiss logos and, Queen and News of the World and, all this stuff, all of that really was the formative stuff for me, like the base, of that like style of music and that whole period. I became more and more into progressive and pop and new wave stuff as things started formulating for me. I got really, really into Rush, the band Rush. I've seen them 8 or 9 times, just completely fell in love with them. And a lot of people over time have, said, oh, you definitely can hear Alex Lifeson in your guitar playing, blah, 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 thank you, whatever. Those types of things, and the Police and, the whole new wave scene and all of that. Definitely a big part of it. But then also I was, exposed to a ton of other stuff. I got, quick story. Kiss was my very, very first rock concert. My mom and my then babysitter took me in 1977, like the era of Kiss, like Alive 2, I think it would be, or maybe Double Platinum, maybe it was 78. And on the way into the show, we're going through the parking lot, and this scraggly, crazy, like metal dude comes up to me and he goes, Judas Priest was opening for them. I didn't know who Judas Priest was. And he goes, are you here for Priest or for Kiss? And I was all of, 11 years old. And I'm like, Kiss. And he's like, you suck. And he ran away, And so I was like, what am I getting myself into? And so I'm with my giant, Kiss brochure, waiting for them to come on. Judas Priest is playing. And all of a sudden I lower the brochure and I see this guy on a motorcycle screaming and singing, and these 2 guitars ripping, twin solos. Blew my mind and changed me in a way that set me on a heavy metal trajectory for sure. Like, I've had a big heavy metal side to me in my life. Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, all the way up until current day, Pantera, Mastodon, all sorts of other stuff like that. So that definitely was a big formative part of the situation for me. I'm rambling, but I'll tie it back together here, I promise. And you interrupt anytime you need me to shut up. And so in and amongst all that, I started to hear people like Steve Vai and, you know, people like Steve Stevens, who is Billy Idol's guitar player, doing some stuff I had never heard before. And while all the heavy metal stuff was going on, I started to discover all these different colors that people like Steve Vai were adding, and orchestration and out there ideas and quirkiness and humor, you know, sort of, you know, Steve Vai played with Zappa, right? So all that stuff kind of came back to me in a roundabout way, you know? And so between that and then getting exposed to jazz, I went to college, undergrad, just for liberal arts, just to get a degree. And then right after that, I got a jazz performance degree, just 2 years of straight, you know, theory and playing, and got into, you know, Miles and Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter and Monk and all those other people. And
so you basically went to school and got a Joe Pass.
Yeah.
Bad puns are alive and well in this world.
And so all of that coalesced into kind of, you know, plus a million other influences I could continue to ramble on, but I won't. Sort of were like the building blocks of this strange amalgamation that is what I'm into, right? Which is very broad and wide, but it's those types of influences that, you know, I bring to bear when I'm thinking of music, playing music, listening to music. Does that get to anywhere?
That does actually. This is about you, not me, but let me just say, you and I have such a similar trajectory. It's freaking me out. I'm awesome. Assuming we're probably around the same age, just from everything you just said. My first album, my grandmother brought me to the store and got me my first 2 albums ever. I picked them out by cover because I was young and I had no idea who they were, but it was Kiss, Rock and Roll Over, and it was Heart Little Queen.
Nice.
And me in my little young boy self fell in love with the Wilson sisters before I ever heard any music.
Yeah.
You know. And Kiss, Rock and Roll Over. That was my first 2 albums, and from there, you know.
It's a good album.
Oh man, it's in my all-time top 10, man. That they figured out a way to out Zeppelin on that album in a lot of ways.
For sure.
It was really good. But go ahead.
No, you're fine.
Yeah.
You're fine.
All of that brings me to, let's just jump into one of your latest releases right here. Sure. And that is Where Were You? And so I was just checking it out. I was listening to it, not just like yesterday and today. I was listening to it. And what struck me first is I thought, wow, this is kind of a really cool singer-songwriter thing. You know, had a nice flow to it and everything. And then bam, the prog hit. And I mean this, understand, I get in trouble sometimes when I make comparisons with other people. I mean this in the highest compliment. I was hearing you almost channel King's X.
Oh, I'm honored. When
the prog kicks in, I'm like it was just like, whoa. And then I got so into the song. So could you tell us a little bit about that song? And we're going to listen to it here in just a second.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting. And by the way, thank you for any comparisons are always welcome. I had a guy on some, it was a recording community about, you know, home recording enthusiasts and comparing notes and giving each other support. And this guy said, wow, you sound like, I know I'm going to blank on the singer's name, but he was like a pop singer from the 90s that I would have never associated myself with. And I wasn't offended by it, but it was so out of left field. But it's just whatever people hear, you never know, which is also a beautiful thing. But I love
as long as they don't say Tiny Tim, right?
Right. Yeah. And even then, there's pieces of him that we need to explore. But
this is true.
So Where Were You? Where Were You was written probably 15 years ago as just an acoustic song that I had laid down like a bare bones version of in my DAW with some harmonies that I had messed with, but there was nothing but me and an acoustic and some harmonies that I had just left around as sort of a scratch demo. And fast forward all this time, as I've been going through my, what am I going to record and write next catalog, there's part of the list that's the From the Vault list, right? Like, would I ever consider redoing this song or re-looking at it? And that was one where I just brushed it off and I was like, what would that be like for me now? And so that's what happened. I was like, okay, so acoustic, great. But I had always heard it kicking in and, you know, it sort of builds and, you know, there's that B section that's sort of a little more emotional and a little more, you know, kind of dark sounding. And that prog section that you're talking about when it kicked in used to just be like airy vocals and just a strummy guitar, like, and it was very, you know, it was cool, but it wasn't angry, it wasn't angsty, it was just more like kind of airy. And then I was like, okay, well, you know, laying in a heavy drum beat, plugging in some heavier guitars, and I was just like, all right, let's see what happens. And that's where from there it just was like, oh, I guess this is where this is going. And the song at the time was inspired by a couple that I was good friends with, that my wife and I are good friends with, who wound up separating. The husband, who was still a dear friend of mine, had fallen in love with someone else and hadn't figured out how to tell his then wife. And he had confided in me. And so the voice in that song is me, as if I had picked up my cojones and talked to her about it. But I was torn. I didn't know if I should tell her. And he was telling me that he was going to tell her, and he had, and it was that whole bit, right? And so it's sort of me amplifying and sort of taking some liberties with what I was experiencing and making it a little more dramatic. You know, I painted him out to be much more of a bad guy in the song than he was in real life, because it wasn't about him anymore. It was just that theme. So that's what inspired it. And when I redid it, I was able to amplify that with all the heaviness and the beefiness, you know.
Well, I'll tell you, with that context now, why don't I go ahead and run the song, and we'll come back right after the song.
Great, thank you.
Of this story, untold, still remain. Closer, I whisper the truth, then you can decide if it means much to you. And all that you've heard here are lies, but all that you wanted
All right, and there we had "Where Were You" by Embers. Dude, I love that song, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks a lot.
I love that song. I have to confess something though. Where were you? Growing up as we did at the time we did, every time I say it, I want to say "Wish You Were Here." just because of the W's, you know.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's an association there in our neurons somehow.
Yeah, I don't. It doesn't sound anything like the song. There's nothing with the song. It's just "Wish You Were Here." Where were you? So I'm keep catching myself. I'm like, no, where were you, man? Where were you? Which is something people always say about my brain. You know, where were you? It makes sense now. So, man,
for playing it, I appreciate that.
Yeah. First off, man, it's like great subject matter for a song. I mean, it's always great when a friend puts you in those situations. You know, those situations where you can't win no matter what you do. But when you're a musician, you end up winning because you come out with a song.
There it is. You know, pain breeds art a lot of times, right?
Yes. You know. Did you play all the instruments? I mean, I'm looking at for everybody here that's not, well, none of you are seeing this. He has an amazing studio behind him. Do you play all of your instruments on this, or do you call in people?
Well, no, I played everything that you're hearing, but you know, with the extremely big asterisk that there's some air quotes around that for the drums, which are programmed.
Right.
So all the drums that you'll hear on Ember songs to date are using either Superior Drummer 3. I was using BFD, which was one of the grandfathers of the modern, you know, really highly sampled, you know, higher quality drum software. Right. And I recently switched to Superior Drummer 3, excuse me. So yeah, those I all program, but I use some pre-rolled MIDI to get me going with those. But I do pride myself in really going in deeply to the drums and trying to think like a drummer and make sure that it's something someone could actually play with, you know, 4 limbs, and that it's not, you know, it's programmed to hopefully be at least respectful to the art, you know.
That's awesome.
But everything else, yeah, all the guitars, the bass, the vocals and the harmonies, that's all me. Occasionally I do some long distance collaboration, and the other song Heaven that you had asked me about certainly is an example of that, where my buddy sang and played bass and we flew tracks back and forth. And I've been lucky enough, my wife is a bass player and a flutist, and she played flute on the end of a treated flute that I made all ambient and weird in the end of one song. And my son is a drummer and a percussionist and a pianist, and I recorded him playing marimba on a song. And so, yeah, it's 90% me, and then I fly some stuff in from others.
That's awesome, man. That's what for those out there that are recording their own music, what's your setup? What's your digital audio workstation? What's your flow?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a Pro Tools guy. I wasn't for many moons. I was a Cakewalk Sonar guy for many years on Windows. And then as we talked about those lulls, I had an ancient, you know, what I thought was going to be my last computer, which we always say, right? Way back in the day, I had a custom built DAW computer, and I loaded Sonar on it, and that was my thing. And I found myself in the Stone Age, you know, able to run, you know, 8 tracks at a time before everything would fart out. And then after much ado, as I rebuilt and we moved into a house that happened to have the space that we were able to make into what you're seeing behind me, it was time to decide how to modernize. And because so many people I was collaborating with or wanted to collaborate with were on Pro Tools, and it's so ubiquitous, I went over to what someone called the dark side. But I love it. I mean, I've really learned how to use it. It's well supported. It has its flaws, but it really works well for me. I go in through a Focusrite 8-channel Thunderbolt pre, so that's my AD, and that has, you know, all I need. I'm rarely recording more than 4 things at once. You know, it's more channels than I need, and I'm pretty much in the box for everything. I don't use much outboard gear to mix with. Everything is, you know, we could go on a plugin discussion forever and ever about what compressors and EQs and soft synths I use. And you actually, the first thing that caught my eye about you on Instagram is that I was getting into, not nearly to your level, but getting into iOS music. And I had a lot of the same apps as you, whether iOS DAWs and or synths or, beat maker, all that other stuff.
Right.
And so I've integrated some of that, but more and more, it's just so much is in the box, so that's kind of my thing. I have a MIDI controller and I have a bunch of guitars and I have, lots of pedals and a Helix floorboard and I use all those things, but more and more it's everything's right there in front of me.
It's funny, but it's not just us guys that are in our own home built studios now, going in the box. There was a documentary series with Alan Parsons, and I want to say it came out you may have seen it. It may have come out almost 10 years ago. Yeah. And he's in this studio and he's got the deck, he's got everything and all, and they're trying to make a song, and he does an initial mix, right? And then in the little run afterwards, they put on the screen, he scrapped everything he did in the studio and went home and mixed it on his computer. So the version we get to actually listen to that he was building for this documentary is not the version that we got to see all the bits and pieces that got put into it, because he ended up going home and mixing it in the box anyway.
It's crazy. I mean, and again, you could go down a zillion rabbit holes on a zillion forums and be read the riot act from people about how there is no substitute for analog gear and you should have an analog to bus to sum to and doing this. And I'm not saying they're wrong, but they're not all right.
It's what's your flavor.
Correct.
This day it's a flavor. And for those listening that don't know who Alan Parsons is, you may know him from Alan Parsons Project and things like that. This is the guy that made Dark Side of the Moon.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about some guy that, he worked in a studio one day and then put a little band together. No, this guy was the engineer on Dark Side of the Moon. So if you've ever listened to that album, this guy mixes in the box now.
He's the real deal. Yeah. And I don't know, do you know who Andrew Sheps is?
The name sounds familiar, but I can't say right off the top of my head who he is.
A very famous recording and mix engineer, and he's done everything from the Red Hot Chili Peppers to Jay-Z to, more esoteric people. But he's highly revered as a good craftsman, and also I think you'd really enjoy listening to him speak. He cuts through the nonsense and is very cerebral but also straightforward. And he now mixes in the box, and he'll tell you that you can also mix on headphones. And he has, and that's one of the things that people will lambast others for to no degree. Now I have monitors in here, but I do both, but he was another one who came up on Neve boards and did the whole thing, and he's completely in the box now, and so for me, it's just a barrier to entry thing. I don't have the facility to have a board and have all that stuff, and so it's just easy for me. At some point I might think about getting some Surface controllers, because mouse clicking gets old.
Yes.
And I'm finding more and more ways to streamline that with, things you can do inside Pro Tools. But beyond that, I mean, if it sounds good, and you're happy with it. And
that's what boils down to it. And nobody will ever have the definitive mix. It tickles me to no end where people will hear something and they will criticize the mix. There is a such thing as a bad mix, don't get me wrong. But sure, once you get past the point of acceptable, things are highly up to opinion at that point. And I'll see some professionals in this criticizing this other mix is this. Then I go listen to their mix. I'm like, dude, that's better than yours,
right.
But in your mind, your mix, so, everything is subjective once you get to a certain point. So you got to find what works for your price, what works for your creativity. The whole digital audio workstation thing. You're a Pro Tools guy. I'm an Ableton guy. There's Cubase guys. And the fact is, every one of them does exactly the same thing. It's just you find the one that works with your personality and your flow.
For sure.
And there's so much, there's no excuse to not make music anymore if you want to make music.
That's the thing. I mean, I'm hearing people, and I shouldn't say this like it's a big surprise, but, for a while, everyone just sort of scoffed at GarageBand. But people are using GarageBand now, and if they want to step up to Logic from it, so be it, in terms of that Apple kind of platform. but you can do great stuff in GarageBand. You can do great stuff in Reaper.
I'll make a confession right here. You're the one that got this confession out of me, right? I normally work in Ableton. Sometimes I work strictly on the iPad, though. I actually scored a movie strictly on the iPad just to see if I could do it. And I use Aria Pro. I use some of the higher end things. But in the museum, sometimes they need something quick turnaround. I mean, quick turnaround. Like, we have this video. We need like 30 seconds of music for this thing, or whatever. And I'll just jump on GarageBand because it's the fastest way to produce anything. It's just fast. And I mean, I don't know that I would go and do something that I wanted to release completely in GarageBand. It just doesn't have that power on the back end. But for something that's going to be in a video or a score where it's going to be muted anyway, it's going to be under a voiceover or something, that is the fastest way for me to get things out. And their orchestra sounds are pretty good for something that you get free.
That's right.
It's amazing.
And the little drum thingy where it will do, randomization or whatever, like, again, to your point, there's really, the barrier to entry is not the thing anymore in terms of just being able to get your ideas in some sort of format. Hence, back to our thing of so many options, that's a good and bad thing, because as we now know, and I'm not hating on SoundCloud rappers, I'm just using them as an example, right? How many, angst-riddled 17-year-old suburbanite kids are in their bedrooms laying down beats and singing about whatever, bad Juul experience they had the night before.
Right.
But still, they at least are doing something. They're making music. And that's the part of me that flips it on its head for myself, is like, well, shit, at least they're making music, right? So weeding through that to find people who are really elevating their craft and trying to, do something that maybe is truly, unique or from the heart is where the differences are.
Well, you've hit on another thing, being an independent, that really, it's a plus and a pet peeve of mine. And this is the old school, basically. And I think David Crosby has made statements along this line, but I know a lot of old school guys have made the statement along this time. Yeah, anybody can put out music, but should they? There's just too much now. And as if there's some kind of a barrier to entry here. And I think they're just, I'm not going to say scared, because they're out of touch. Correct. They live their life in their ivory castles, if whatever. I just picture David Crosby living in an ivory castle. I don't know. Being grumpy as hell in his ivory castle. Right. But this is not a zero-sum game. You may put stuff out and it may not catch or anything, but I personally like that it's out there. I found some amazing stuff. When people complain to me that there's no good music anymore in the world, I'm like, you're just lazy.
That's it.
You need to go out and find it. I will write you 50 pieces of music off the top of my head that you've never heard of these people before, that I've built relationships with, and it beats everything on the radio right now, because it's everything you say, everything you want. It's not formulaic. It's not written to the 1-4-5 chords. It's not, it's right. It's so yeah.
Oh, yeah. If anything, I think what happens, and I said this to you when we were talking about the feedback loop, that when you sent me some stuff the other day to take a peek at, that a lot of people, even with positive feedback, are, and I'll confess to being part of this when I don't hold myself more aware than I should be, or as aware enough as I should be. We're soundbitey now, and that our attention spans and our consumption patterns have changed radically from when we'd sit with an album, wipe the seeds off the top of it, read the liner notes, and like actually dig on it, right? And sit and consume it from, track 1 to track 7, or whatever it was. And so it's A, yeah, we're busy, and B, we multitask a lot, but C, maybe more importantly, even our willingness to go listen to those 50 people and take a minute to say, well, yeah, I know he sent me those, but I got to go do this, or I'd rather, do this. it's another, I hate to say lazy, because that sounds like haughty of me or whatever.
Well, just to say, when I said lazy, I don't mean they're lazy like they're not listening to things presented to them. I'm like, they're lazy that they're not going out there trying to find the new music world.
So maybe lazy is the right word. Maybe I shouldn't take it back. Like, it's just, it's you have to decide if you're going to complain and then someone gives you something to check out, then, you know, that's been pulled out from under you at that point. And then if you listen to the 50 songs or even 10 of them and go, meh, all right, you win, right? You know, but at least don't say that there's nothing to try and consume.
Exactly.
So I amen, you know.
Yeah, I have the has my mom heard you on the radio thing that I get from people sometimes. And no, because, you know, I'm pretty sure that I've never been on the radio. I mean, I'm pretty sure you've never heard me on the radio, and definitely your mom hasn't. People, I kind of lament the end of the superstar, because when we were growing up, it was a thing. It was a thing. So one thing that the internet has killed that I don't like is the death of the superstar. We now see them warts and all. They're not that group that were out there and just, they're just like, oh, do you know what he did last week? You know, it's all gone. But at the same time, where the internet took something away, it gave us something back. But some people are still stuck in the old tropes. When I tell people, you choose what success is for you now. Is success having your music on Spotify? Is success playing local gigs? Is success playing regional gigs? Is success paying the bills with your music? You get to choose what your level of success is now. With me, my music pays for itself, which I consider as the level of success. But then on that same note, I get my paycheck for making music for other people. Yeah. So I'm kind of in the game. And one day I may want to take that to the next step. But you don't get to tell me that I'm not successful because your mom hasn't heard me on the radio.
Oh, right.
You know, it's like, that's another thing with an independent. You choose how far you want to go, then you make your goals, and then you work toward those goals.
Exactly. Which is what we said, you know, at the start of the conversation, right? About, you know, it's good to have all the freedom, but the beauty of it, if you embrace it as such, in my opinion, is exactly what you just said, is saying, okay, for me as a dad and a full-time day gig, and, you know, I like to cook and train Kung Fu and do this and do that. When I do music, success for me is having all the things you rattled off. I have sold a minuscule amount of music, but it's out there, and I have a way to be in this room and create the way I want to create and share it and see what I can do with it, right? There are other things I have on the burners to try and accomplish, but, you know, I never thought I could do that. You know, back in the day, even if I had my Tascam Porta studio, how was I going to get everyone to hear it?
Exactly.
You know, there was no Instagram, there was no SoundCloud, there was no Bandcamp, there was, you know.
And people don't understand that it wasn't just getting into the studios and having the gatekeepers back in the day tell you that you were good enough to even get a shot.
Right.
It was the cost. There were no digital audio workstations when we got started. Well, I had this saxophone that I played. Well, I couldn't play. I have a thing where I can't read music. It's a learning disability. So I flunked out of band really bad. But I had this saxophone, and I'm like, I still want to be in music. So I'm like, I'm going to go trade it in. And at the time, I was listening to the Ramones and the Sex Pistols, and Heart and Kiss. And I was listening to Gary Newman, and I was listening to Jean-Michel Jarre, because Jean-Michel Jarre had just made a splash with Oxygen and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So, wow. I'm like, I'm going to go see what I can trade this guitar, but trade this, well, I gave it away. I'm going to see what I could trade this saxophone in for. And I got to Hoffman's Music, and I'm looking, and I could get an old Feinen acoustic guitar, which is still right back there. I don't know if you can, no, you can't see it. It's right there. Still own that guitar. And that was it, because that's all they were willing to trade me. I was looking at the synthesizers, and the cheapest synthesizer was like $2,500.
Oh, wow.
And of course, back then they had the Fairlight. They didn't have one there, but they had the Fairlight, which was $25,000. Yeah. And here's the thing. Back then, if you got that synthesizer, you still technically couldn't make music, because that synthesizer only did what that synthesizer did.
Right.
If you want to do something else with the synthesizer, you had to get another synthesizer. That's right. And MIDI had just come in. So then you had to get the thing that synced them together. And drums, no, the synthesizers didn't have drums on them. You had to get a Lin machine or something like that. Exactly. So you're like 15,000 in, and you haven't even got a means of recording the music yet. That's right. And now every one of those synthesizers I ever wanted to own back in the day, I have an emulation on my iPad.
Exactly.
You know, it's just nuts. Kids today,
Yeah,
whippersnappers, you kids today just don't know.
I carried a PV uphill both directions to go to band practice.
Exactly.
Yeah, man. And it's so funny on that note. Like I recently got the Arturia V7 collection or whatever it is. Great emulations, anything from a DX7 to a Synclavier, you know, and a lot of things in between. And I'm happy. I'm just, you know, happy as a clam with it and really enjoying it. And then of course I'll go to like look something up and be in a comm, and then there's people like shredding the emulations down to the Nats derriere, you know, about, well, I don't know if the, you know, the DX7 Bell's peg quite has the upper mids that the, you know, original unit had. And I'm like, dude, be happy. Just like enjoy what you have. Like, you know, like
these are things that the people that are listening to the records don't care anything about. They don't care about it. That actually, the term "okay boomer" actually fits in this position. I don't care how old a person is.
Totally.
I mean, and by the way, we're both Gen X, so we're the best generation. So
we are, man.
There you go.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, but that it does fit. And anyway, so that's why I'm so grateful. You know, someone asked me recently on that other podcast I was telling you about, well, what are you grateful for? And one of the things was, I just have access to all this wonderful stuff and all these wonderful people like you and everybody else, you know, and the people you get to in the subset of your, you know, social media travels that are actually engaging, you know, and want to have a conversation and be part of each other's success. Like, it's just so cool, you know? And so I choose to be happy. I mean, there's just too much good stuff to do, you know?
Well, speaking about gear, man, and like I said, you guys listening to this is audio. You're missing out on this, but I'm seeing the awesome headless wonder behind you, and I remember you got that just recently. How's that working out?
Oh yeah, it's been a little bit now, but it's still pretty new. Yeah, it's a Strandberg Prague 7. They have several models. Strandberg is a company out of Sweden, and they have become famous for this oddly shaped thing. You know, depending on when you put this together, you could certainly bring in a picture of it. But yeah, it's great. It's my first 7-string. I know you've got the Kraken. Is it the 8-string?
Yeah, I got. But that I'll be honest with you. That's not same level. I wanted to get an 8-string, and you know, getting it by the wife wasn't exactly going smoothly. And I heard a couple of good reviews of the Harley Benton, so I went and got the Harley Benton from them. It's not an 8-string anymore, though. Technically,
I saw what you did. I saw your post. Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's technically a 7-string with an octave added.
I saw that, which, hey, you know, whatever makes you happy. I mean, and this has been really great for me, because back to that comment I made earlier about the sort of metal heavier side to my DNA, I didn't get it just because it has a low B string and I can go chunka chunka chunka. You know, that's cool. I love that. It definitely gives me some access to some different voicings, but you know, the pickups in it are Fishman Fluences, and they're very kind of tight and modern. I wouldn't call them organic and earthy sounding. They're not, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not without any character. They're not, you know, too pristine, but it filled a void in my arsenal. You know, to have something that could allow me to do some down tuning and heavier stuff, but also kind of gave me some good crunch, very stable. It's great. It plays wonderfully. It sounds great. I'm really happy with it. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm on the fence. Trying to convince my wife to let me get the Sarah Longfield.
Oh,
just because I love the paint job on it.
Yes.
You know, and then I can say, look, I'm supporting Sarah Longfield.
Yeah.
Even though I don't know what her kickback is from Strandberg at all, but I could say I'm supporting Sarah Longfield.
Sweet looking guitar. Yeah. That thing is really cool.
And speaking of independent success stories, you know, the avenues for independence. Let's talk about that for a little while. Sarah Longfield, if you're not familiar, is a YouTube celebrity, and she's an amazing guitarist. And she made her bones on YouTube. And a lot of guitarists now, I'm thinking Steve, the guy that's kind of manic, Steve, his name's escaping me right now, but he's the manic guitar guy. And there's a few. There's Jared Dines and all, and there's this whole subset of independent guitarists. There's Mary Splendor, and then there's the bass player guy. This is a whole group, and they're like a cabal. They're like all friends and everything. But instead of going out and making it an album sales and the traditional things, I mean, they may play out, they may do all that. They made their bones by developing their music brand on YouTube, and some of them are instructional, some of them just play on YouTube, some of them create vlogs. It's like in the independent world, sometimes my brain gets ahead of my voice. In the independent world, there's nothing telling you which direction you have to go to be successful, and that's amazing.
Right. That's right. It seems to be the theme we keep coming back to, you know, by osmosis. And yeah, I mean, Ola Englund's another guy.
Yes.
Bunch of people like that, and it's a hybrid for them too, which is also beautiful, because he has this whole does it chug thing where he just will try all these different, you know, amps and guitars out and see if it can rip or not from a metal standpoint. But on the other end of it, he'll do a video about, you know, setting up a Floyd Rose, or a playing video or a recording video. The guys from Periphery, Misha Mansour and Nolly Getgood, Adam Nolly Getgood, those guys are all affiliated with the band Periphery, but they're also affiliated with Neural DSP, who make amazing amp sims. Like, those are my go-tos for sure. But they're doing all kinds of stuff, and they do Get Good drums as well. And they've got like product lines, and they're doing instructional videos, and they're marketing their music, and they're touring. And I mean, you know, they're maybe a little bit, you know, at a next level, but that is a true thing. And you can monetize that if you're patient and persistent and on brand and on message. And I know people who have done that, not a lot of people, but, who've done that. And then there's this side benefit about, someone just mailed me this new amazing pedal and they want me to do a demo of it on my YouTube channel. And by the way, here's the pedal. No, you keep that. Like, you can get gear and software. And, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that should be anyone's prime motivator, but, you know, if you're out there doing that and you create enough of a following, it's a side benefit. There's so many little things you can parlay if you're savvy and patient.
Man, you just wandered into the dark territory now, though. And I'll tell you what that dark territory is. These guys, man, they get their equipment, and you know what? They earned it. The reason they get it isn't because they're lucky. It isn't because any reason you can think of. They're talented, they worked hard, and they bring a value to those companies that give them that equipment. That is called making it. But we're in that dark zone now, because then you go to the comments section and it's sold out for a pedal, man.
Of course.
You know,
right.
Wow. I've never, when you're in music or any of the arts, you're always brushing up against this thing that people want to support you and people want you to do the best. But as soon as you do anything good, man, what happened? You change, dude. I don't want to pay for that, man. You know, I don't want to. Okay, you don't want to pay for your music because music should be free. Hey, can you help spread the word? Man, I got a busy life. I can't spread the word. Hey, can you just post the album on your Twitter? Man, I got this. And, you know, you're at the end of the day, you're like, well, you know what? I'm going to go do something and get a pedal for it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Right. You know, call me what you want, but yeah, that's, oh man. Yeah. That's a bummer, you know, when, you know, someone said, I think it's an often used quote, but like, your biggest fans are people you haven't met yet.
Right.
And your biggest haters are people you know.
I actually brought this up with Ishan in the last one, and this is something I kind of want to touch on with everybody, and you brought it in eloquently. I asked him, I'm like, are the people that you find like your music or support your music or are there for you, are they strangers or are they the people in your life? And the reason I ask this is because I always misquote this, but basically saying a prophet is never respected in his own home.
Right. I like that.
In other words, you're Aben. I've known you. You're Aben. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Right. You got a new album. Isn't that cute? Right. Exactly. But then I go on Spotify. I put it on Spotify. I don't have major plays on Spotify, but then I'll go check my Spotify stats and somebody in Indonesia's listened to it. And I'm like, oh!
You got the coolest. Yeah, man.
Yeah. Like somebody in France just played it. I'm like, dude, somebody in France is playing my music, man. And, you know, but then I can't get my friend down the street to even listen to the album.
I know.
You know?
I mean, it's a mixed bag, you know, because I think I said this to you as well in some of the banter we were having the other day, that even if you do get them to listen, at times it's one of a few things. If they're fellow musicians that you came up with or that are in the, you know, I think there's a subset of them that will be chill and actually, you know, we bolster each other, even if we've known each other for many years. But most are just either going to thumbs up it and move on, or there's you mentioned, you know, has my mother heard it on the radio? There are just people who are going to blow sunshine, right? And, you know, that's nice for a minute. It gets you off the dock if you're a sailboat, but that wind dies down really quickly, right? It's not meaningful, sustainable, you know, feedback from a broadening audience. And so if grandma likes it, so to speak, that's cool. But if that's where you're looking for your validation, it shouldn't be the only place, in my humble view. Like, it doesn't mean you shouldn't go there, but the people you know and love are either going to, you know, go, yeah, you're Larry, you're Eben, or they're just going to tell you it's the best thing they've ever heard.
And that's always reeks of you know, I can't even get the word out. My mouth.
Disingenuity,
yes.
Right? Or disingenuousness.
Yes, exactly. It'll come out eventually.
But it's cool. I mean, it's a real thing. And so then, like I said earlier, when, and I'll give him a shout out, there's a guy named Daniel Barton, who's otherwise known as Heartbeat Hero out on Instagram. And he's part of a synthwave, you know, subset of people out there. And he has a live stream, and he asked to do a remix of a song of mine, and he's in Paris, and it was just so unexpected, and it felt so nice to have someone that I didn't know want to connect and then even collaborate. That was just one, I couldn't believe it. It was, you know, whatever comes of it wasn't the issue for me. It was just so nice, you know.
This brings up another thing that I'd like to get your opinion on.
Sure.
That collaboration is great. I've been able to collaborate. I actually have an album that I put out through the museum that I collaborated with others, and that's so awesome. And like us even just talking right here, this is what the independent scene should be. Unfortunately, from 2005 to 2010, I was working for Pod Show, which became Mevio. I was doing a podcast called the Indie Music Blast, and I did a daily indie music podcast. And the thing that drove me nuts and eventually drove me to stop doing that was actually having to deal with independent artists. I would get to a point where I'd put an artist on the show, and then I'd get an email like a month later, "Hey, nothing's happening, man. What's wrong with your show?" I'm like, "Well, what's wrong with you, man?" Or I would get people that were on the show, and then I'd check them out, and I had to say, "Don't you think maybe you should build a website?" They're like, I'm on MySpace, dude. I'm like, dude, don't you think you should give me a little more to work with? And the biggest one of all was I had this band on. I'm not going to give the name because I'm not that kind of person. It was a duo, and they had signed a contract with Pod Show. At that point, it was Mevio, that their music could be used in the podcast. It's called Pod Safe Music, the Pod Safe Music Network. So I put them on my show, and a couple of weeks later, I get a cease and desist letter, written clunky. So I know it wasn't written by an actual lawyer, saying that they had gotten signed. And by signed, I assume they mean like my label, which I'll even admit right here is a reason for me to put up me and my buddy's Jeff's music. Okay. So it's like, there's no big machine music behind my label. It's just me going through Bandcamp, putting out me and my buddy Jeff's music and all of our different things. So I'm assuming that was the label that signed them, that type of label. But they were telling me that they were going to sue me if I didn't take their music out of my podcast. And I sent them a nice email back saying, A, congratulations on getting signed. B, you're going nowhere. C, you're going to see no money. And if you sue me, you're going to see less money.
Exactly.
And I never took that song. I never took those songs. Are still in those shows. The shows aren't online anymore. I'm thinking about putting them back up. But okay, so that was a long way to get to the question, to the question I want to ask. It's like, why do you think so many people in the independent music game see it as a zero-sum game? Rather than coming together, they'll snipe at others behind their back, or they'll cut down the talent of another person in the local scene instead of just like, we should all really be coming together. What do you think is behind that?
That's a really good question. For me, and this is just, without like being able to sit down with those people and ask them that question, It's armchair psychoanalysis that I'm about
That's
to
all
do,
we got.
for what it's worth, right? I would say, I think it's probably, some insecurity and competitiveness, both of which are probably things that most artists have to one degree or another. It's just how you manifest it and control it, right?
Yes.
And feeling, ironically, that the time spent, stepping over or someone, or positioning yourself in front of them, or, trying to one up them, or whatever is positioning you for success, is like a short-term mentality. It's like, it may even work short-term. You may be like, you get that gig because you told the booking guy that this other band, is irresponsible, or I don't know, I'm making a story up that never happened, but
I bet you it has.
whatever it is. I mean,
Yeah.
I tell other stories that have happened, but that, like, hey, okay, maybe you got that gig, but in the long run, and maybe some people think this is, Pollyanna-ish or hippie-ish, it takes a village kind of thing seems to be what it's all about. And if you look through your feeds and you see all the people that seem to be doing well saying, hey, lift each other up, or hey, listen to this new single, or hey, collaboration is key, or hey, like, whether it's little affirmations or phrases, it seems to be the successful people doing that.
Yes.
Why the other people aren't doing that, I think, is fear. Maybe at the end of the day, it's just like, I'm not good enough to if I do it together, I don't trust that I'm good enough to be part of that. I don't know.
It's a weird thing. If I could change one thing, it would be to change that mindset, because helping somebody out is only going to pull you up these days. And gone are the days where we have to compete for these record contracts. And gone are the days where we have to be the opening act that blows the main act off the stage. I mean, we don't have to be Guns N' Roses on the Motley Crue tour where they actually came to blows. It got so bad, because Guns N' Roses would blow them off the stage every day and then start criticizing them on stage. And, it's like those days, although I have to admit, those days were fun. That was back in the days when the rock gods ruled,
I mean, there's something to be said, but it's not what's real anymore.
And nothing. I don't know. Hopefully we can get through. Hopefully somebody's listening to this show and then they're going to go out and do something good for another artist,
And it's also, if you want to be pragmatic about it, isn't just a moral imperative, for like, it feels good to me and that's fine. But if you want to be pragmatic about it and a little selfish, if I can be so bold, doing that just is a better way to create connective tissue and opportunity. It's not just noble. It's a positive sum game, because it self-serves as well, because then you meet people who can help you and maybe do things for you and with you. And if you go into it with that mindset, in my opinion, then you get the best of both worlds. You create opportunity and you're also being a good citizen, as it were.
That's it. And I can say from experience, the club owners, at least the ones I know, they prefer the people that are helping others and are cool in the scene and are nice to everybody. The prima donnas come out and all, and they may sound good and all that, but they're very tough to deal with on all levels. Exactly. I'm like, dude, you're not Michael Bublé. And I hear he's a nice guy, I hear. So
he probably is. I mean,
only Yngwie Malmsteen can act like that and still get shows.
Oh my God. It's funny you mentioned him. He was one of the people back in the day that I idolized, and I met him. I cut school. I left school to go. I had him painted on the back of my denim jacket by an artist friend. I was that into him for like
some dude.
It was weird that I did that in hindsight, but anyway, it was fun. And so he was at Tower Records doing a signing, and so I brought my jacket, and he was about to play a famous rock club in Brooklyn called L'Amour's that night. And so I was waiting in line for an hour and a half. And then I finally got up to say, the 10 seconds of time to say something I had. And I said, "Are you excited about the L'Amour's gig tonight?" And he was like, What? And I was like, "Oh, the L'Amour's gig you're playing, And he's like, he just couldn't hear or whatever. And then like his handler or whoever was like, "Move along, da 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 da," and like, and it was just one of these like sour moments. Like Yngwie wasn't a dick to me, but he was definitely like not making an effort to try and like have a minute of dialogue with me. And he was my hero.
Yeah.
I didn't like throw my jacket away or anything, but I was just like, man.
Yeah.
That's my Malmsteen story. Woo!
Well, we can reminisce a little bit on Yngwie, because Yngwie he's so amazingly unself-aware. There are stages of Yngwie. He came up in the band Alcatraz.
Yeah.
And for note, when he left, they had to replace him with Vi.
Which, Disturbing the Peace is one of my favorite rock albums of all time.
Yeah.
Playing on that is insane. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and this kid plays he was a kid back then, plays a scallop fretted Stratocaster. He plays these neoclassical bits, went with Alcatraz, released some of the best shred albums in the 80s.
For sure.
And then came the airplane incident. Do you remember the airplane incident?
I feel like I should, but I don't.
He was on a jet and he got into an altercation with a lady. Now you have to understand, Yngwie, no matter what, will wear leather pants and his shirt almost all the way unbuttoned and all. And when Yngwie was young and skinny, that worked. But now Yngwie's fat.
He's kind of puffy.
But he still wears everything the same way. Look, I'm not in the greatest of shape, but I'm not Yngwie. And evidently they got in a spat on a plane. And Yngwie jumped up and screamed, "You've unleashed a fucking fury!"
Oh my God! Wow.
And then I started hearing the stories. I just triggered my dogs with Yngwie's fury. So Yngwie started getting more and more inside of his own head. The first thing he did was, when he'd go out on stage, he would perform front and center on the stage, and he would move the entire band off to the side. And when questioned about it, he would say, "Nobody comes to hear the backing band." And then Yngwie has had the best singers in the world. Sato, the guy from Rainbow, his name is escaping me. Turner.
That Rainbow guy.
Yeah. I mean, he's had some of the best vocalists, right? But now Yngwie sings. Now he has his band pushed off to the side of the stage because nobody comes to hear the backing band, and he doesn't bring a singer out anymore. Problem is, Yngwie's not a great singer, but he claims it's only him on the stage. So now he sings his own songs too. So there's stages of Yngwie,
Wow. That's that. Well, with great talent, there's a fine line, right? Between insanity and
yes,
or whatever it is. And yeah, he's amazing, but he's also a weirdo. So
yeah. And you know what? He's one of the last true rock stars. He just doesn't realize rock stars don't exist anymore. And you've got to love that.
For him, yeah, man, keep it going. Fan those embers.
Yeah, just fan the embers. That was a great turnaround, man. Yeah, that was good.
Together here, dude.
So we're talking Yngwie, we're talking the shredders, and now we're in our little reminiscing mode here. Yeah. What was it that was so bad about our 80s life that they had to destroy it all in the 90s, man? I remember Eddie Vedder giving, and don't get me wrong, I love Pearl Jam, but Eddie Vedder giving the interviews. Nobody comes to see the lights and the explosions, and people want to see the real. And I'm like, those lights and explosions are pretty freaking good, man. When I saw Van Halen, it would have been a completely different experience had we not had David Lee Roth and the explosions and all that. But what happened in the 90s? There was even a point where people were wearing it like a badge of honor that we do not do guitar solos.
That's right. Oh yeah. I mean, I think it's just, it's all just cyclical. It's all just reaction and, action and reaction. And so we went through a decadent, hairsprayed, over the top, sheened, crazy 80s period. And then it was just people trying to do something different. And so that looked like what the 90s looked like. And it looked like flannel, and it looked like Alice in Chains. I love, who I love, and looked like, Stone Temple Pilots and Nirvana and other stuff. But it also looked like Fishbone and Primus and some other good stuff too.
I saw them both at Lollapalooza in the same year. That was awesome.
I saw them together at Stony Brook College in Long Island, New York. That was a wild night. But so yeah, that's all I think that was probably. I mean, and then it just, and now of course 80s is in vogue, and half the really good synth pop bands you hear out there are really borrowing unabashedly from that. And so it's all cycles, I think. And old codger statement, but that's what I think it is.
Well, and the guy from Flock of Seagulls with his wig is still actually touring on one song.
good for you. Hey,
You know?
those udders are chaffed and and
Yeah.
worn out, and wrinkled, but man, he's still getting milk out of them somehow.
That's it. But there's something to be said. Like bands can the trends come and the trends go. You see it actually change bands. Like Heart in the '70s was an amazing rock band. Heart in the '80s was a corporate band.
No,
It changed. But then somewhere in all this, AC/DC and ZZ Top exist.
I know.
It's like they just ran the line the whole way, and they're like, "Look, I'm not changing for anybody."
Oh, AC/DC is now only purchasable at Walmart, or there was a period.
Oh, yeah, they did that album release at Walmart. I mean, sales techniques. Now that's something, but
the same. They stayed the same, and then like I'm trying to think. Aha,
yeah.
They're still playing, and I heard them do an unplugged version of that
Yes.
filled my heart. It was so beautiful. It was incredible. And so it's like, oh, right, these guys like can still mature. Neil Finn from the Finn Brothers, Split Ends, I Got You. That's
he's in Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, but Neil Finn is like a singer-songwriter like he's just matured, and he's like a fine wine kind of guy. From this whole evolution where he cut his teeth playing kind of poppy new wave stuff,
Yeah.
I don't know. Thomas Dolby. I don't know. Hero of mine. Hero. And people just think of Blind to Me with Science, and it drives me nuts because he's written before and after that album some of the most beautiful and interesting music, and funky and crazy.
One of the problems with living in the United States is, or being an American sometimes. I lived in England for 3 years, and I lived in Germany for 2 years, and I saw, and it kind of shaped the way I look at things. We think when somebody disappears from our radio that they go away. But some of these people enjoy rich, long careers. Like Aha has been releasing albums steadily since the 80s. And their stuff has really matured, and they're a very respected band. When we were young, the joke used to be, "Yeah, but I'm big in Japan." Before the internet, you could say that, "Yeah, but I'm big in Japan." But every now and then there was a band big in Japan, and that's where that actually came from. Cheap Trick broke in Japan; they couldn't get any airplay.
Budokan, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, that's one of the prime examples. And yeah, no, that's a real thing. Wasn't there an album by someone called Big in Japan? I can't remember who it was, but
there probably was. There was that I think the end of the Big in Japan thing was that movie Singles. It had Matt Dillon in it. It was like, remember the Seattle scene?
Yep,
and his band was big in Japan.
That's right. Oh, and one other plug from this reminiscence for another band and group of people who've matured and that people have a certain association with is Tears for Fears. So everyone, I mean, even all their great hits, Songs from the Big Chair and everything like that, amazing, still, and not even something to look back with like, oh, wasn't that silly? Like, still great stuff today. But Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith have released albums both by themselves and come back together that are just incredible. And with some of the best studio musicians in the UK and Europe, and like, people just think of Shout and Everybody Wants to Rule the World, which nothing wrong with that, but there's so much more.
I mean, you think of the 80s, and for every Bananarama out there, which was like a female monkeys type thing, they didn't have a TV show, but they were put together in the studio. For every one of them, there were 10, 15 great acts.
For sure. Yeah, it's cool. It's, again, it shows you back to what you can do with yourself and how you want to evolve, even as a famous person. It ain't over until it's over, right? You see where the road takes you, and so now they can do that stuff if they want to, even more easily than the average Joe. So,
all right. So we're at this point in the show now where I'm going to put you on the hot spot.
All right.
So your experience, your life as an independent, making music, making it work in your life. Are there any top tips or any advice you can give to people that are thinking about going down this road, or maybe struggling with it because they haven't got to the point where, I think you and I are both at a point in peace where we're at, but maybe others haven't got there. So is there any wisdom or anything you can give? Yeah,
sure. It's one that I would, it's one that I think lends itself to a lot of caveats and asterisks, which I'm going to try to avoid and I say that because it's so situational, right? Like my case, having come up playing in bands in New York, having brushes with fame, you know, being on Electro Records with a band for a hot minute and doing this and doing that, you know, auditioning for Color Me Bad, good story, all kinds of other stuff. You know, I came up with a certain set of goals. Then my life changed. I chose to do something different that didn't exclude music, but didn't focus on it. And now I'm back at a point where I have a different stage in my life where I'm doing it for my own reasons. That's why I mentioned all the caveats and asterisks, because blanket wise, I'll give you what I think I can give for whatever it might be worth to anyone. But it's with that notion of, you know, apply as fits to your situation, right? Because
Yes.
it's not cookie cutter. And I think it comes back to, if I could say one thing, which is not about what gear you have or whether or not you've got, you know, you figured out what DAW you want to use or what platform, or if you want to be on Spotify or Apple Music or both. It's what's your intention, you know, and that sounds maybe a little bit, you know, crystals and incense, but it's really, what are you trying to do? Like, stop for a minute before you invest money or you spin your wheels and write down in your head or on paper or wherever, what do I want to do? And that could be really big. Like, I want to make music and I want to have a lot of people hear it and I would love to make money from it. And then pare it down, you know, so what do you need to do next? Like, if you can start there and almost mind map it, I know it sounds crazy, but like, if you're just starting out and you're trying to figure that out, know what either big picture or even in the next 6 to 12 months, what do you want to do? What is this for? And if you do that, I think the rest of it fills in pretty quickly. Okay, I want to play in a band. Okay, so you want to play with other human beings. Okay, what's next? Do you know who those human beings are? What kind of music do you want to play? Who do you know who you might play with? You know, da 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 da. Or I want to record hip hop and I want to make beats. Okay, cool. Do you have software? Who do you like? Have you done any research on how to make beats? Do you have a sample library? You know, are you going to use, you know, what software might you use? And on and on and on. And I think if you have some intentionality about what you want to do, then it becomes less overwhelming. And of course, this is very broad stroke stuff I'm talking about. We could get into a lot of details underneath that about, you know, how do you market yourself? How do you build a website? How do you choose how to be on social media? How do you personify yourself? How do you reach people? Those are all topics for a million podcasts, right?
That's true.
I think that's the main thing. And I had to do it myself with Embers. And again, like I said at the top of this, and I'll say it again, I don't have hardly any followers. I don't consider myself a success in the sense of I've gotten this many people to buy my stuff or stream it, or I have all these plays or this, but I have the means to make the music I want to make, to share it the way I want to share it. And I'm continuing to hack at that and refine that so I can expose it to more people and get better at it. But I had to figure out what that meant. And that meant, okay, I need a new computer. I need a studio or some semblance of it. I need to figure out how I want to write songs. I need to, and I filled in the blanks. Does that help?
That's excellent, man. That's great. One of the things that people tend to do is, hey, I got this. Let me throw a whole bunch of stuff against the wall, see what sticks, but then they don't look at what sticks and they go down this path and then this path and then that. No, that's excellent, man. That's I love that. I love that.
I don't know. And again, it's just the trajectory I was on. I mean, if I were 25 in this day and age, I'd probably have a different answer, because I can't relate to what it must be like to come up. It's like, you know, people who never grew up without a microwave, you know, or never grew up without an iPhone, or it's like, it's that same analogy as, you know, people from a certain generation. I don't know what my path would be if I were just starting out with this now.
We'd probably be mumble rappers. All this equipment that I have, all this equipment I see behind you, that costs real money. Mumble rappers, you pay somebody $5 for a beat and go for it. Again, not criticizing mumble rappers.
No, it's fun. I mean, you know, to each their own, but I mean, you know, but that's the thing. And there was a whole Billie Eilish and her brother, you know, made that song in his bedroom thing that came out, you know, around the Grammys time a couple months ago. And again, that's the deal. Like, I think technology can get in the way of all this, ironically. So that's the other thing I'd say to folks is like, you know, take a deep breath, you know, as you're planning your investments in this, and do it iteratively and figure out what you need bare bones to start with, because the sooner you get better at one or two pieces of your rig that are most essential, that pays so much more dividends about, like, you know, learning how to capture a sound in a microphone well, or keep your guitar in tune and get good levels, you know what I mean, is so much more important. Or, you know, getting a decent sample library and making a steady beat versus getting 1,000 soft synths, Fruity Loops, Ableton, a million programs. Like, focus. Like, don't, back to our comments about being soundbitey and distracted and inundated with information. Try to focus. You know, you'll get better at things incrementally, and then it just builds more easily. I don't know.
I can add a little to that. And that is, back when I was younger, when I first started out, and DAWs were coming, digital audio workstations were coming out. Man, I was a pirate, man. I should have worn an eye patch. I was such a pirate. But I can tell you this, I never wrote, recorded, or released an actual track until I threw my money down and stopped trying everything.
Nice.
You know, yeah. So.
And that's the other thing too. You know, shit, I pay for your damn software, people. You know, come on. You know, it goes back to that thing about, you know, are we lifting each other up or not? Like,
yes.
You know, I know it's not free, but there is so much you can do on the cheap now that if you're not paying for it, you know, instant karma is going to get you.
Yes. I've seen it time and time again. And hey, I'm taking some of those arrows myself. I was younger and dumber at one point.
Oh, I did it too, dude. Yeah. You know, I got Fruity Loops cracked from someone, which is now FL Studio, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it was great. And it was how I first started making beats. Not that I'm a beat maker, but how I first started doing electronic music. And then after a time, they were like, hey, lifetime upgrades. And it was like, I don't know, back then, maybe $75 or something. Right. And at the time that was like, whoa, I'm going to buy Fruity Loops for $75. And I'm on version 20 now. I don't use it all the time, but it's, they gave you lifetime and still do lifetime free upgrades, you know, I mean, granted, they have different levels now if you want all the bells and whistles, but, you know, paying for that, to your point, was one of the things where I was like, I just felt better. You know.
Well, you know, if anybody's looking to get into this, and money is really, really, really a problem, you brought up your very first software, Sonar. Yeah. That's absolutely free now. No catch or anything. It was bought by a company. Cakewalk went out of business, and their intellectual property was bought by a company in Japan who turned around and they released it, the full version, free. So
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Or programs like Reaper or GarageBand that came with, you know, if you have an Apple product or an iPhone, even or an iPad, there's just a lot you can do. So anyway, it's super fun. And then the other beautiful thing is setting up a Facebook page and Instagram and SoundCloud and Bandcamp is all free. Yeah. It's all free. That's insane.
And think about that. Learning how to do it. There are people that on YouTube that will teach you how to do it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just as you try to fix your faucet with YouTube or make a pizza dough, all this stuff is out there. It's such a crazy world like that we have so much access to this. Now, granted, you know, it's sort of like, you know, so I saw it on the internet, so it's true. You got to wade through some caca to get to good content sometimes, but, you know, trial and error is a good teacher. But yeah.
You know, that was such great advice, and I would add something to it, not in opposition, but add. It is something that you said in there. It's, don't be ashamed of the music that you make. If you are using samples, or if you're using, or if, let's say you don't know guitar and there are programs out there that you can use that can simulate guitar, at that point, it's your songwriting, it's your songs. Don't ever fall prey to these people that like, I like to go see bands that have been practicing their instrument all their life and all, you know, that's bullshit.
That's great. God, that's such a good point. I wish I had you know, thought to bring that up, because talk about, man, so many things are tying back to what we talked about just offline in the last couple of days. Perfection is the enemy of good. right? You know, I mean, that's such a cliche, but holy moly, take a look at that as another strong piece of advice. It's very, for me, anyone who's an artist creating original content or even cover songs, but let's just say whatever you're doing, any sort of original art, whether it's audio or otherwise, you know, any media or medium, there's ego and there's vulnerability and there's self-expose. Every time you put something out for others to consume, it's nerve-wracking for me. And I've gotten better at it and more used to it. It's akin to stage fright, I guess, to playing on stage. It's a big deal. It's like going out and just opening the kimono and saying, here's a part of me. And the feedback there is so easy to give flippantly, whether positive or negative, but know that in this world, you're going to take your lumps too. Like, even if you put something out, not everyone's going to like it. And if you're in it to share, you have to accept that. Like, it's not easy to do. And warts and all, and iteration and development are nothing to be ashamed of. I love the way you said that. Like, it's really, truly something that each person has to take a look at to what they're willing to expose of themselves. But if you sit there trying to make everything from the beginning of your adventure with this or wherever you are in it perfect, you won't get things done. Move on, release things, get things out there. I'm not saying put utter crap out there if you don't feel at all happy with it. But if you're like, hey, I think this is good, I wish I had more time to spend on it, but I need to move on. That meter is constantly in flux for any given person, and you have to keep looking at that and calibrating it or recalibrating that meter. But man, get shit done. If you, you know, that's one of the biggest things for any creative endeavors. Call something done and move on. You can always go back to it. I don't know.
And as for having haters, I'll just say this. I'll say this bluntly. If you're making stuff for everybody to like, you're doing it wrong.
Great point, man. Great point.
If somebody doesn't hate what you're doing, go back to the table and take a scissor to it.
That's a good point, man. That's a good point. You can't please everybody. And there's no, just like the music we all listen to, I don't like everything. There's stuff I don't like. Now how I'll react to it may be a choice to just not say anything. Now that's where haters versus just personal taste, there's a line. But yeah, you know, make stuff that you like. I mean, that's, again, such another big cliche, but do it first and foremost because it's what you want to hear. And then if other people dig it, so be it. But if you're right, we all write to an audience to some degree or another. Anyone who says they don't is either lying or is a rare breed.
Right.
You know? So you can't do that completely in isolation. But if you feel yourself wondering too much about, well, will so-and-so like this, or will, you know, people like this, or my girlfriend or whomever, or my boyfriend or whatever, if that's what's guiding you too much, I think you're going to wind up, like you said, maybe not really being true to yourself.
If you're doing that, you may be called Nickelback. Who knows?
Another funny story. Quick. Do you know who Devin Townsend is?
Yes, I do. Love his stuff.
Hero of mine as well. You know, Strapping Young Lad and Devin Townsend Project, his solo stuff. He's from Canada, and through a long chain of events, he, like many other musicians, has railed on Nickelback in various, you know, formats or situations, and wound up somehow getting in touch with what's his face, the main guy,
Chad Kroeger.
Thank you. And wound up like getting invited to Chad Kroeger's house. And as Devin Townsend explains it, it wasn't a house, it was a compound. You know, hate on Nickelback all as you want, he's got lots of nickels, you know. And he went in and they had this like long talk where he was like, Devin Townsend actually played some of the demos that would lead to his Empath album that just came out. And he was like, dude, you need to raise your vocals in the mix. You need to sing out, like, just let people hear you scream. Like, I mean, like, don't be like, Chad Kroeger gave Devin Townsend pause and feedback enough to the point where he was invited to sing backups on the album on a couple of songs. And so Devin Townsend was like, dude, the guy's, you know, does what he does, but he's misunderstood. He's a good dude and he's talented and he's thoughtful. And so it was one of those moments where it's like, all right, fine. I won't use the Nickelback joke anymore.
Well, you've hit on a point. Now, I often say there's no such thing as bad art or bad music. It's just stuff that you don't like. And Nickelback and Creed became the kicking boys of the internet or the music world. But in the end, they really are just rock bands.
Yeah, they're just another bunch of guys playing and writing songs. Now, granted, they may be doing it in a way that, you know, we don't necessarily gravitate toward, but okay.
Millions do, though.
Yeah,
and they're not wrong.
Yeah, there you go. That's another thing too. It's like, you don't like pizza? Well, guess what? A lot of people love pizza, you know. But you know, that's the other thing is I often, people who aren't doing something creatively are often the loudest critics of those who are.
Yeah.
And I always bite my tongue, but sometimes I want to say, well, cool, I'm glad you hate them so much. What do you do creatively? You know, have you published anything? Are you writing something? Do you sing? Do you play? Like, look, some people have to listen to the radio. Some people have to be on the radio to be listened to. But man, check yourself if you're really going to rail on people and just know, like, hey, they're out there putting their shit out there. Like, they're sharing. You don't have to like it, but turn the channel, man.
Exactly. Well, hey, man, we have gone like an hour and 23 minutes. And you know what I have not done yet? I haven't asked you where people can find you.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, come on. It's time for me to whore this stuff out. No.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and depending on how you do this in your podcast, so the main website is embersmusic.net, One True Confession, and another lesson. Embers is a widely used name. It was a big mistake. I won't back down from it because I'm too lazy to change it to something else now. But boy, if you're going to market yourself, choose something that might be searchable. And
I got a point for this. I'm not to interrupt while you're whoring yourself out. But speaking of names, Senator Jaiz is a name that I had in a punk band way back. I got the nickname in Germany. Then it became a character on my podcast so Senator Jaiz has been with me for a long time. Now it's my musical project, right? But then I go to Facebook to try to do some Facebook marketing, right? And I get rejected every time and have to put in an appeal saying, look, I'm a musician. I'm not a senator. I am not, because I always get slammed by Facebook that I have not gone through the vetting process to be able to put out political stuff. So yeah, be very careful with choosing. Yeah,
it's a good lesson. But ultimately, all my stuff, the releases are all on my YouTube channel, which is Embers Music. Facebook and Instagram are at Embers Songs. I'm on SoundCloud and Bandcamp. SoundCloud and Bandcamp are also Embers Songs. The easiest way, if you're a Linktree person, is Linktree at Embers Songs. I have all the stuff there, so you can choose how you want to find me. I'm on Spotify and Apple Music primarily. I don't do much on Tidal or Deezer or the other stuff. I think when I release my stuff, it goes there through my distributor, but I don't really pump it because I don't know anyone who uses it. If you do, that's great. I just don't know.
Not all of us can know Jay-Z.
Correct. Or want to? No, I would love to meet him. Actually, it'd be fun. So yeah, the embersmusic.net and Linktree at Embers Songs, and you'll find my stuff. And thank you, for anyone who goes.
I will have that link, the Linktree link, in the show notes to this show. So if you're listening to this, you can find all of his places. I just wanted to watch him say it all.
Very exciting stuff, and thank you so much, really, truly, for reaching out, and B, for having me on. Very, very appreciative of that. And like I said earlier, my wife has watched me go through this gyration of kind of doing this Embers thing, and she's extremely supportive. But she's like, well, what, you're on the Instagram and Facebook and all, social media, like, what are you doing out there? Like, is it working, quote unquote, or like, what are you getting out of it? And there's a lot of like follows and then someone hitting my comments to say, check out my beats, and the whole like rigmarole. That's the usual MO of Instagram and other platforms. But within that, I said it earlier, there are a subset of people that you find through osmosis or, however it works, that you discover are actually in it to listen to each other, to support each other as best we can. It's not like, that's all we're doing. We're all busy, but you can tell after a time that, you know, if you have 1,000 followers, maybe 200 of them are those people, or maybe 50, or maybe 10. Shit, I don't know. But that's really cool. And I wanted to thank you for being one of the first, as I got into it, that I felt that, you know, spark with, and that over time, as we see each other out there, it's been nice to see what you're doing. And I love your stuff, and I'm going to keep my lips sealed about what's coming for you, but I'm excited for you and all that, you know.
Well, I appreciate it. I feel exactly the same way toward you. And you know, it's not a numbers game, because one person is worth a million.
Yeah.
It really is true. And you hit on a point. I'm going to make one more point before we go away. If you are on Instagram, comments work. We found each other through commenting on each other's stuff, but we made comments.
Yes.
It never works when you say, check out my stuff, bruh, because I have never, ever clicked on a profile that says, check out my stuff.
That's boo hiss. I mean, look, you know, if you comment and you connect, and then you could say, hey, you know, once you have a relationship, it's fair game to say, hey, if you wouldn't mind checking out my stuff, or, you know, hey, I love your new thing, I'll share it in my story. Would you share mine and yours? Like, there's some quid pro quo, all in good spirit, that let's not fool ourselves, is helpful and is necessary. But yeah, come on, like, don't hijack threads and try to promote yourself. It's not going to work. And I know we could go on and on, but one thing I'll say also, depending on what your goals are, if you're trying to make a ton of money by streaming on Spotify or Apple Music, just know that it's rare air, and it's the game and the numbers will be against you. Do some research on that. Yeah. I'm exploring the world of sync licensing now as another avenue for my stuff, which, you know, may not be for everybody. There's a whole other art and science to that. But again, be careful of your goals, because if you're thinking it's just going to be Spotify and you're going to be the next Joji or whomever, it's really hard.
But I can say, when you do look at your profile and you're looking at your streams, and you're like, really, was that all I got this month? And you look at the people from other countries that just found your music, and it may be one stream from another country, that'll make your day.
Yeah, that's the deal. Appreciate, you know, the iterative nature of it. But anyway, there's so many things to talk about, and I'm glad we got to cover what we covered.
Well, Larry, man, it sounds we could actually probably go on. So maybe in a few months we do a round 2. I
would love it, man. I'd be honored. And again, like we said, we mean it. And here we'll prove it. Anything I can do to help you out, let me know as you're doing your next, you know, set of releases and stuff like that. And we'll keep each other posted and do what we said we should.
Definitely. Larry, it's been a pleasure. Embers in the house here, everybody. Larry, man, I'm so happy we did this.
Me too, man. Thank you so much again. And thank you for anyone who's listening. And we'll see you out and about.
All right. And be sure to hit the show notes there and check out everything Embers. Later, man.
Later. Thanks again.